If you're having trouble getting the hang of your bait casting reel, man, join the club. Whether it's the backlashes or the trouble with getting good casting distance, these suckers can be an absolute pain, but once you learn to master it, you're never gonna wanna pick up that sissy spinning reel ever again.
He doesn't mean that. What did I do?
So in today's video, I'm gonna give you my 5 baitcaster best practices so you can learn to master this thing and become a better angler today. My name's Tyler, and let's talk about it.
Another giant, another giant. Look at that, y'all.
I can't believe what I just caught.
Yes!
Well, what's going on, and welcome everybody to TRF. My goal here on this channel is to help you guys become a better bass angler, but you know what? Not just bass today. I want you to become a better bait casting user. This video is for every type of angler. And this video today is brought to you by my merch brand called Infinite Outdoors. Being a man of faith, I believe in the infinite love of God, and look around us, the infinite possibilities to make memories in an awesome, beautiful world around us, especially in the outdoors. That's what I'm all about here on the channel. If you want to check out the awesome hats that I have, the sun shirts, the AFCO Reaper sweatshirt, who doesn't want a good sweatshirt? And I've even got a t-shirt that has my favorite fishing slogan on it that says, "Give them the business." No pressure, but if you want to check it out, I will have it linked down in the video description. Now, let's get to tip number 1, best practice when it comes to bait casting reels. And that is to make sure you pick the right lure for your line size. Now, I guess this could also apply to spinning reels, but it really applies to bait casters because of the way these things cast. Everything is built internal, whereas a spinning reel here is all external. So the line flies off the bail itself. On a baitcaster, it has to spool through the eye here and then through all the guides. And so if you have the wrong weight lure paired with the wrong pound test on your reel, you're gonna have a hard time casting. Now, I don't necessarily mean pound test as in 10, 20, 30, 40 and above. I'm talking about line diameter, the thickness of the lines, because a 10-pound braided line will be significantly thinner than a 10-pound resin, aka monofilament or fluorocarbon. So for example, on this baitcaster here, we have the Lew's Custom Pro, and we have 17 or 15-pound fluorocarbon. That line diameter works perfectly for casting a 1/2 ounce vibrating jig. If I was to cast a small lure, such as a Ned rig on this line combo, I would have a hard time casting a very light lure. Also something like a jitterbug, a tiny topwater, on this thick of a line diameter, I'm just telling you, they have a harder time casting lighter lures. And vice versa. If I'm gonna throw a heavy lure, a big glide bait, a huge swim bait, a big spinnerbait across the bottom, and I'm throwing it on a super thin pound test, yes, you can still cast it just fine, but I'm just telling you, a heavy lure on light line, you're gonna deal with tons of problems of breaking off on the cast. Maybe not near the beginning, but once your line starts to weaken, you're gonna have problems with that. So of course, when you're first picking up a baitcaster, you may not fully understand the correlation between line size and lures, but definitely give them a test and find out what works best for you. I'm just telling you, for thick line sizes like 17, 20-pound resin and 50, 65-pound braid, they have a really hard time casting light lures, so don't do that. And another thing relating to light line on baitcasters with heavier lures is that is a prime recipe for getting tons of backlashes. Take it from me, you don't want to do that. And that's probably why you're watching this video. And that leads me to tip number 2 with the baitcaster, and that is stop throwing light lures on a baitcaster unless you're gonna get the bait finesse system type thing, but most of y'all watching this video probably haven't even heard of that, and if you haven't, you're not missing out on much. I think lighter lures, in my opinion, again, 20 years of bass fishing experience and knowledge, I think lighter lures are better thrown, the finesse stuff, on a spinning combo. You wanna go with your more heavy lures on a baitcaster, even though the small lures, of course, for all of us, tend to get tons and tons of bites. As a kid, I know I picked up the Mep spinner, some tiny pond buzzbaits, tiny topwater poppers. That stuff, of course, gets bites from many different species of fish, but I will not use those lures when I'm fishing a baitcaster 95% of the time. The baitcaster to me is meant to be a kind of a stepping stone from your more beginner fishing to your intermediate and advanced fishing. And so I'm just telling you, in my 20 years of fishing and watching professional anglers, I have yet to see the vast majority of them. Again, we look to pro athletes or pro fishermen or pro anything to see the right way to do things. Hardly any of them throw the ultra light lures, even though they get bites on a baitcaster. That I think should be reserved for a spinning rod. So if you're frustrated, man, I can't cast my weightless soft plastics very well, maybe that is not meant, at least maybe in this stage of your bass fishing journey, to be thrown on a baitcaster. Start with your heavier lures, and then once you understand how the braking systems work, maybe throw lighter line, a more moderate action, power rod. At that point, maybe go to your lighter lures, but at the start, just throw heavier stuff. Now for baitcaster best practices practice number 3, I want you to watch 2 of the top pro anglers on the planet just for a few seconds to notice if they're doing anything special with their bait casting reels. Now, if you didn't catch that, I'm gonna make it crystal clear. They are using their bait casting reels to the max efficiency possible by using a pendulum swing of the lure as it comes back to them, and then swinging it back out there for the next flip, never taking their hand off of the reel. And doing that is only possible by learning to fish with both hands on the reel for different types of situations. Now, can you cast like this, switch hands, and then engage your reel, like I do here with the right-hand bait caster, and still catch fish? Absolutely. But so many times, especially around boat docks like I have here and just fishing around shallow cover, just like Andy and Cole were doing in that video, is that if you can learn to keep your hand on the reel, even if you're more accurate with another one, you can be so much more efficient on the water. So oftentimes, just like they were doing, you swing it out, you reel back in, press the button, and swing it out there again. I'll show you here. Reel back in, pendulum in with the button, flip it back out there. And by doing that, you can be a much more efficient bass angler. And I'm just telling you, the more casts you can get out there, you're gonna become an even better fisherman and catch way more bass. Now, there are times when I'm more accurate by flipping or casting with my dominant hand. I'm right-hand dominant, so casting with that and flipping, I'm more accurate. But if I wanna make way more casts throughout the day, of course, I will learn to do any kind of casting angle possible. And this one, again, this best practice may be minimal in terms of your fish catching capabilities, but if you wanna be a true master of the baitcaster, go out in your yard, stand on a bucket or a barrel, and practice this season just casting over and over and over again. Roll cast this way, flip this way. You're gonna become a better angler, and I promise, catch more fish. Now, the 4th baitcaster best practice doesn't necessarily have to do just with a baitcaster, but I notice most people don't do this both with baitcaster or spinning, so I felt like it applies. And that is that you can apply action to whatever lure you're fishing in the water column with more than just the rod. So I'm gonna cast my vibrating jig out there and show you what I mean. I feel like most people out there, let's go with moving lures, so spinner baits, chatterbaits, crankbaits, topwaters, that kind of stuff. You cast it out there and you reel straight back in. Can that catch fish? Absolutely, but sometimes those fish need a little bit of erratic movement down there to trigger them into biting. And so the number one thing I've seen, I think Kevin Van Dam talked about it years ago, is that you can pump your rod as you're retrieving, and that kind of pulsates, especially a spinnerbait and a chatterbait gets that skirt kind of moving. But one thing you can also do is vary the actual retrieve on your reel handle. And I know it's not specific just to a baitcaster, but if you can learn to do this in conjunction, simultaneously with moving your rod, you will be able to give your lure some insane action down there and trigger more bites. So let me show you. I'm gonna cast out there. As I put my rod tip down and I'm retrieving it, I can stop and start. Start and stop. And that is accomplishing pretty much the same thing as pulsating the rod. But if you can do both at the same time, you can really add some good, crazy action to your lures. And it may look different on a spinnerbait than it does on a walking bait. Oftentimes I see people, let's kind of take a walking bait for example. Actually, I've got a frog. Here we go, topwater frog. If I throw it out there and start my retrieve with the rod tip, I can get it to walk back and forth. Now you probably can't see that, but it's walking back and forth. This is combining the erratic movement of the reel handle and with the rod tip. Now I can also walk the frog after enough practice by just moving the reel handle. So I'm just twitch, 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 and the frog is moving back and forth. And so again, it is a total feel thing, but once you understand how to move your reel handle and your rod in conjunction, you're gonna be able to get your lure to be presented in maybe a different way than all the other anglers around you. And just like swinging a golf club and getting the feel of that takes a long time, doing this well takes a lot of time, but I promise, putting the practice in, you'll catch more fish by adding a different level of erratic behavior to your lures. And the 5th and final best practice for using a bait casting reel is put some dang new line on your reel. I can't tell you how many garages and barns I've walked in and someone says, hey, check out my collection over there. And I say, when's the last time you used this reel? And they're like, yesterday. and I feel the line, it feels like piano wire. And not just because it's actually thick pound test, it's because it has got some crazy memory. So I would recommend on a bait casting reel to throw a resin line. I love 15 or 17 pound fluorocarbon. I think for the majority of bass fishing lures, again, I do mostly bass fishing, a resin line makes the most sense. It's clear in the water, has minimal stretch, of course, still does stretch, but I just love a fluorocarbon. The problem is any resin lines, copolymer, fluorocarbon, monofilament, you name it, is going to have memory. That means when it sits on the spool, it's going to, like you remember things, it's going to remember being on that spool. And so if I take the line and I pull it out of the spool, you can see there's a little bit of memory on that line. And this line here is only 2 to 3 weeks old, and it's already got some memory. That's natural, and that's okay. But the problem is, if you have memory on your line that's been there for 3 months, 6 months, a year plus, you're gonna have a hard time casting. And I can tell you from experience, just this week, when I picked up a reel that had old line on it and I went to cast hard, I immediately got a backlash. And it wasn't because my brakes on this weren't set right. It wasn't because I was throwing the wrong size lure for the pound test. It was because my line was old. Now, how often do I recommend changing your line on your bait casters? Well, for resin line, if you fish regularly, I would say every 3 to 6 months. And honestly, at that point, you've probably retied your lure enough times that it's time to respool and fill your spool. Anyways, another sneaky tip, make sure you have a full spool of line. You're going to cast better. But for a braided line, honestly, you can go several years without changing. The only thing you're going to lose, at least in my experience, is the actual color of the braid, and most of the time that doesn't affect the actual strength. So if you want a long-lasting line, go with braid, but if you want a better line, in my opinion, for most bass fishing lures on a bait caster, go with resin and change every 3 to 6 months. Now, one line hack to make your resin lines on your bait casting reels last longer is to actually stretch your line. And I don't mean stretch it here on your hands. The best thing you can do is to tie your line, either with a lure on it or not, to an immovable object. I love to tie mine somewhere to my truck, and then walk backwards down the road, into your yard, whatever, about 1 to 2 cast lengths, engage your handle, and then pull to start to stretch that line. And after a few pulls, slowly start to reel in maybe 5 or 6 feet, and then pull a few more times. And repeat that process all the way until your line is back into your reel. Now, could this potentially weaken your resin line? It could, but anecdotally, I have never found that to be the case. So if I'm going bass fishing and maybe I'm out of line, but I know my line has memory, before I go, maybe the night before or that morning, I will stretch my line just one time, and I get way better casting distance, and I get a whole lot less backlashes. So those are my 5 bait casting best practices. Now, if you want an even more basic level understanding of bait casters when it comes to line and understanding your settings, I will leave that video up here in the corner. Of course, I will leave all the tackle that I love to use down below. Those are affiliate links, and I will also leave the link to my merch if you want to check it out. My name's Tyler. As always, it's a pleasure, and we'll see you guys next time right here on TRF.